You have a new album right now that's called Goes West. So I
Thank you.
the first thing that comes to mind, I think, with a lot of people when we listen to your music is we hear the sounds of John Fahey, Robbie Basho, Leo Kottke. We hear those influences, but I think listening to the newer record, we hear a lot more. We hear influences of jazz and classical music, and it really brings to mind players like Bill Frisell and these amazing jazz players. And I was shocked to find out, I was excited to find out that Bill actually plays on your new record. And I wanted to know how it feels. Well, I want to know about the influences of classical and jazz guitarists on your music, but what it's also like to play with someone, I assume, someone who influences your music like Bill Frisell, and what it's like to grow and become a contemporary
Sure.
with those people.
You know, one of the things I joke about a lot, or not joke about, but just it's one of I'm 39. I've been playing music for almost 20 years now, and a lot of the people who I grew up idolizing, who seemed like giant, like Mount Rushmore type. You know, you're never gonna meet these people. Like sometimes you do, and most of the time they're really cool people. It's one of the great things about music. And another thing that's great about music is that it's one of the few art forms where it's performance based, but it also doesn't matter about what age you are. Like something I learned growing up in Nashville was that like it didn't really matter if you were 80 or you were 15 in terms of like if your instrumental ability was a certain way, you got to hang with the same dudes, and like that's what's beautiful about music. So like with Bill Frisell, I mean, it was kind of just a weird coincidence because this guy Tucker Martine, who recorded Goes West, the new record, has done a bunch of Bill's records, and they're really tight. And one day Bill called him kind of out of the blue, and they were talking about stuff like, you know, scheduling a session. And Bill asked Tucker, he's like, "Have you ever heard of this guy William Tyler?" And Tucker was like, "Yeah, dude, I'm making his new record. You should play on it." Wow. And he was like, and at first I think he was kind of like, "Oh, well, yeah, I don't know if I have to, you know, whatever." You know, he just got a little, you know. But then we were like, he totally did. He made time in his schedule to overdub on this one song. We weren't in the studio with him. He did it remotely. But it was magical. I mean, it's like, I don't know what the equivalent feeling of that would be. It's like, you know, he's like one of my favorite musicians ever. And then you like get these Pro Tool session files, and it's like that guy playing guitar on your song. It's like that was a pretty cool moment. So, yeah, and in terms of like just what you were talking about with jazz and classical influences, I mean, you know, I grew up in Nashville, and there's a lot of great musicians there, as most of y'all know. And there's a lot of great musicians who play classical music and jazz. But because the city is so specifically based around one kind of music, and has been for so long, and is now getting more, as much pop as there is country, but there's kind of this weird void of like where people who play kind of non-commercial music, where they fit in. And I've just always been drawn to that kind of music, like specifically because most of it's instrumental, and it's about the melody of the players. It's not about the singers and the lyrics. I think like both in classical and in jazz, there's a tendency to have very evocative titles for your pieces that are supposed to sort of make you think about, you know, something like, sometimes mine are more explicit. This guy in Memphis was like asking me about like one song and then another song, and I was like, yeah, that's a book. He was like, so you just name I should just Google all your song titles. Most of them are books or movies. I was like, yes. You know, that's my way of sharing that part of my interest. Some of them are love songs, and they all kind of. But anyway, the point is, compositionally, classical music has been the biggest influence on me. Even though I'm not technically like a classical musician, I didn't go to music school.
I've recently heard you refer to your music as rural new age. And I think I heard you somewhere say you considered it cosmic pastoral. I guess rural and pastoral, they kind of evoke the countryside, or I don't know. What does
Which is
rural
why I
New
live
Age
in
mean
Los
to you?
Angeles, the least rural pastoral place in America. No.
So what does that mean to you?
I think it's. I think there's something about music that I'm not. I'm really. I mean, I'm going to try to not talk too long about this. I think there is like a place in 2019 specifically because the music business is like this fragile ecosystem that is collapsing daily, kind of like our actual ecosystem. And like I think like I'm around a lot of people who play like definitely in Nashville I was around a lot of people who play country music and singer songwriters. In LA I'm around a lot of people who play punk rock music and also people who are like electronic DJs and like there's these different roles that every kind of music fills. And whatever people like me and a few other instrumentalists that are I feel like our colleagues are doing, I'm not really sure what it is. It's sort of background ambient music, like it's good to drive to, it's good to do yoga to, it's like
That's the New Age part.
that's the new age part. The cosmic pastoral part I think is that there's something inherently psychedelic to in my mind to what I'm doing. But it's psychedelic in that it invokes spaces that to me are, the longer I go, the more American they seem. And it's something I think about a lot with, I was thinking about it today on the drive, like so much great psychedelic, music has, and recently like sort of post-rock music has come out of Texas specifically. And I think it has something to do with like how much wide open space there is and like how big the skies are. And it kind of provokes this sort of cinematic, it makes sense to me that like a band like Explosions in the Sky is from Texas and not like New York City. So like that's something that really informs me, and I feel very Southern in my sense of like what grounds me. Like even making jokes about like pimento cheese, and I'm like a vegan now, so like I don't eat pimento cheese, but I think it's rad to have around after a funeral. So like that part of it, but I'm also like I'm a pretty like I wouldn't say I'm a hippie, but I'm definitely like the sort of progressive, yearning, intellectual part of like the West Coast appeals to me, but like the pretension doesn't. So I'm trying to meld those philosophies into something that is probably really only applicable to not that many people, which is why I don't sell a lot of records. But nobody sells records anymore, so.
A lot of people right now are still mourning the recent loss of the poet, singer, songwriter David Berman. We know that y'all toured together. You played guitar in Silver Jews for a little while. I was wondering if you would want to share any memories you have of David or talk about how he influenced you in your songwriting and how you work.
Yeah, I mean, David was, first of all, being in a band with David, who if y'all aren't familiar with Silver Jews and David Berman's poetry, and like he was one of the best lyricists, of the last 30 years probably. So being in a band with him, made me want to stop writing lyrics. Because it's like, I just, it's like, there are not that many guys who can write songs like that. Like Townsend Van Zandt did it, and, John Prine does it, and Bob Dylan does it, Leonard Cohen did it. Like, so one of the things about David, the thing that most influenced me was that he was obsessed with every detail of what he was putting out into the world, whether it was a book of poetry or a record or even a music video. It was so deliberate. Everything about it, the artwork, the titles. And it's why he wasn't a very prolific artist. I think he really struggled with letting go of things. But I remember him saying things kind of like, because I started making my own music right at the end of the last Silver Jews tour. And he would say things kind of like, you just have to be careful what you're putting out into the world because it's not just art, it's energy. And it's like you're asking people to pay attention to your ideas. And not only that, but you don't pay for them. And so that was a big influence on me. But another big influence with David that I don't think a lot of people who didn't know him realize is that like he was a very unpretentious person. Like he was one of the smartest people I've ever known. But and he could go deep on intellectual stuff, but like he really like he moved to Nashville because he was obsessed with the art of country songwriting. Like I think he really thought when he moved to Nashville, like I can figure out a way to write a country song that'll be a hit, because he really really admired like the school of, you know, the Townes Van Zandt, you know, Billy Joe Shaver, you know, like Mickey Newbury, like those guys. And I think that like for him, he would see things that were grandiose and things that were popular. And I think that aspect of him not being like a snob or like an academic, you know, like he was like, you don't, he told me one time, he was like, you don't ever need to read James Joyce. Like you have to have an English teacher explain it to you, you know, like you should just read Cormac McCarthy, you know, like that kind of thing. But yeah, so I just his life philosophy and his sense of humor and just kind of his sense of righteousness were really influential. And he, you know, to be fair, he was a really hard person to be close to, and it was a challenge. And I know he struggled. Obviously, he struggled with it his whole life, and he just decided he couldn't struggle with it anymore. So, but there are not a lot of guys like him.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
So we saw that you spent your life growing up in Nashville, and you played music, and you've been a session player in Nashville. But now you have moved to California. You've gone west, and I wanted to know how a sense of place affects the way you write music and how you work.
Well, sense of place is really important to how I write music, and to be honest, like, living in Los Angeles is not, I don't find creatively inspiring in the way that I would like I definitely would like get more ideas for songs if I like took a drive out into the countryside or the desert for like 2 days, you know, that kind of thing. But there is a kind of optimism to California that's sort of just in the air that's really hard to pinpoint. I mean, a lot of it is the fact that there's a lot of people with a lot of money there, and it's easy to be optimistic when you're rich. But I think it's more than that. It's kind of a spiritual questing for something that's more transcendent. You know, it's why the psychedelic movement started there. It's also why the internet started there, you know, like, so it's just a different perspective. And in the climate of America that we're in right now, I mean, it essentially feels like you're in a different country. Which at times is nice. So,
one last question. I know that you've worked you're also producing music. You work in the studio with other artists, right? I saw that you produced the record for Jake's.
Oh, Jake, yeah.
And it's an amazing record. But I saw something that I didn't expect was that you, in 2017, you worked with Mary J. Blige on the song Survivor. What did you do there, and how did that come about?
Man, I wish I could lie about this, but that is the weirdest non-fact that I've ever seen. Really? That it literally did not happen.
It's on.
And somebody told me that it was on like a Wikipedia.
It's on
thing.
your Wikipedia page.
And then I was like, that is amazing. I mean, I'm sure there's another. There is a William Tyler who's like a male model from New Zealand who looks like. He's got like the kind of, you know, he's got like the outlaw country like beard and long hair, but he's like incredibly jacked. Like it looks like he works out like 12 hours a day. But he's kind of pretty too, and I feel like if we were able to fuse forces, like it'd be pretty unstoppable. But I'm definitely not that guy either, and maybe he's the one who did the Mary J. Blige track.
I'm so glad we got to set the record straight tonight.
For public radio, too. Thank God, you know. I would love to work... Also, I'd love to work with Mary J. Blige. Just putting it out there. I'm really easy to get a hold of.
You've done it once, you can do it again.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us
much.
tonight. I'm going to let you get on with your set, and we really appreciate having you here. Thank you, William Tyler.
Thanks, y'all.